Part 3. From Base to Superstructure. Why do problems in the base lead to the creation of superstructures? What do superstructures do for the base?
If superstructures offer solutions to the base's problems, for example, recurring failures, unfillable gaps, endemic conflicts, unavoidable unproductive activity, these superstructures cannot operate in the same way as the base. If they did, either the base could solve its own problems, or it would not have such problems in the first place. Conversely, a superstructure must work in ways that conflict with how the base operates. Otherwise, it could not do things the base cannot. So superstructures cannot be wholly subservient to or explained by their base. Hence the need, to some degree, for each superstructure's relative autonomy. For example, as already noted, industrial capitalism needs its workers to be educated, literate, numerate, disciplined, and many with highly developed technical skills. However, if capitalism wanted to sell mass education as a commodity, its own workers would have to be paid enough to buy private education for their children. This would require employers to pay much higher wages. But these employers would not benefit from this. The children would not become workers for years and years and would probably work for someone else. So there is no profit to that business in any sense. So capitalist businesses will not fund mass education directly, but educated workers are still needed. So various social groups organize education. Churches, charities, socially or charitably minded entrepreneurs, and eventually the state. In an industrial society where a high level of education is essential, this leads to huge educational superstructures for largely capitalist purposes, but by non-capitalist means and outside of the capitalist base. At the same time, these public education systems operate largely independently of the underlying base. That is, they have relative autonomy. Or again, the family. With few exceptions, the family has always performed basic social functions: childcare, basic education, socialization, care for the sick and elderly, maintaining workers between periods of work, nourishment, rest, shelter, entertainment, a home. These are all things the base needs, but which it cannot create for itself. Hence the family's specialized role as a superstructure in all kinds of society. More exactly, it shows the family's role in the production and reproduction of labor. All modes of production have shaped the family to suit the base's specific needs. For example, under capitalism, the family needs to suit a rapidly changing society based on individual employment that seeks to profit from absorbing many functions of the historical family. To do this, the capitalist family is different from the kinds of family that predominated under previous modes of production. In particular, it has taken on specific forms: nuclear, private, socially mobile, and geographically mobile too. The capitalist family's role has also been limited compared to previous societies. It does not provide all education. It does not provide all care for the sick and elderly. It does not provide extensive social welfare. It does not transmit economic skills, tools, professions, or employment between generations. And it performs minimal domestic production. So the family reflects the nature of capitalism. It is directly involved in producing and reproducing workers, in economic circulation, exchange and consumption, and in society's health, education, and welfare systems. So it must be compatible with capitalism as a whole. On the other hand, like all other capitalist superstructures, the family is constantly invaded by capitalist interests. It is the locus of a huge amount of final consumption of goods and services. It is a prime market for labor-saving devices and for domestic services. It is also conditioned by the demands of the capitalist labor process. But the family still isn't like capitalism. None of the capitalist relations of production apply. The family isn't anyone's property. Members are not employed by the family. Family life isn't based on money or commodity relations. Relationships are not transactional. Its reproduction is not based on wage labor. There is no surplus extraction. More generally, the structure of the family is not formally defined. Unlike a company or corporation, relationships are irreducible to formal roles. Membership cannot usually be terminated, though divorce can fragment it. And continuing membership is not based on performance or evaluation. Essentially, a family is a self-propagating group of inherently connected individuals living in personal relationships of full human complexity. It is not a profit-seeking organization of formally recruited members or assets to be exploited or functions to be executed. In fact, capitalism is actively opposed to the family. Capitalism would like to monetize as much family activity as possible, for example, by replacing family functions by commercial products and services. Capitalism would like to minimize the family's share in the economy, wages and work benefits and social services. Capitalism would like each family member to be isolated and move separately so they can be employed as and where capital requires without regard for the integrity of the family. But if the family were completely subordinated to capital, the functions the family performs for capitalism would collapse. So workers would become less capable of creating surplus value. In short, conflict between family and capitalism is endemic, but some form of family must be sustained. As with all other superstructures, every family stands in a contradictory relationship to its own economic base. But how can superstructures be autonomous? How is any real separation possible? After all, the base determines the need for and functions of its superstructures. The base provides most of the resources available across any given mode of production, including those used by its own superstructures. The base shapes the core of human experience in production, in circulation and exchange, and in consumption of goods and services too. Yet many mechanisms make autonomy possible. Some are negative. That is, they make it difficult for the base to control its superstructures. For example, the foundation of superstructures in the base's own contradictions inhibits the base's awareness and control, so its efforts to understand and control its own superstructures tend to be mistaken and self-defeating. Superstructures are often subject to pressure from many sides, from the base, the state, other superstructures, users, internal experts and authorities, and so on. This creates opportunities to play these off against each other. Members of superstructures tend to pursue their own interests, financial, ideological, political, professional, and so on. Other factors make autonomy absolutely necessary. Some things only work when separated from economic interests, for example, justice, science, technology, academic education, high art, charity, philosophy, defense. They need autonomy from the base if they are to serve the base. Every superstructure also creates its own specialized expertise, so external judgment and direction are not adequate on their own. The skills and opinions of internal experts are indispensable. Superstructures have their own internal logic. This must be obeyed if they are to work. Conflicting demands and conditions force the rationalization of the superstructure itself. This gives the superstructure a unique and indispensable form and encourages discretion and independence. In many modes of production, the general purpose form of many resources means they can be used at the superstructure's discretion. Money, gold, tribute, slaves, taxation, wages, tithes, independent wealth. This separation operates on many levels. First and foremost, functional separation. Superstructures must do things the base does not or cannot do. That's why the base needs superstructures in the first place. But there's also structural separation. In order to do different things, a superstructure must be equipped with specialized forces of production that make little sense in the base and be organized on different principles from the base's relations of production. So a superstructure may have its own organization, workforce, authorities, methods, information, controls, institutions, administration, laws, and much else. There's also typically a high degree of geographical separation. To service the base as a whole, a superstructure must often be situated away from any particular part of the base. So, a religion creates its own sacred spaces. The family has its private home. Political and government superstructures are generally located in national or regional capitals. The military occupy specialized bases or other countries, of course. Finally, there is ideological separation to explain and justify itself and to others on its own terms, and also to maintain the other forms of distance from the base a superstructure needs in order to operate. So how does this separation come about? In order to fix the base's problems, members of the base, such as property owners or feudal lords, or their political or religious representatives, or just individuals coming together voluntarily, use society's resources to build specialized structures to fix these problems. As a new mode of production comes into existence, many superstructures will also be created or transformed to actively eliminate the old mode of production and to impose the new. This is not a straightforward process. In fact, it is likely to demand the abolition of many old superstructures, changes to many existing superstructures, and the creation of many radically new superstructures. Building new superstructures is not simple. The base does not give any explanation of or instructions for solving the problems its superstructures need to solve. Indeed, the base's problems may only be recognized in ideologically distorted forms and conventions. For example, climate change or military defeat may be interpreted as divine judgment, so the solution is massive new expenditure on temples and rituals. Or again, many bourgeois superstructures express Enlightenment ideals as much as capitalism's real needs. Superstructures often need to be designed and constructed from new, so new superstructures are usually built by individuals and groups who have never done this before. This is exciting, but also problematic. New superstructures also often demand weeding out enemies of the new base who controlled the old superstructures. In other words, building new superstructures is inherently complex and problematic and likely to be vigorously resisted. Maintaining superstructures is also complicated. As the underlying forces and relations of production develop, their superstructures must be continuously readapted, rejustified, and re-resourced. This may demand a substantial political effort and major ideological gymnastics. So, superstructures are inherently political. They usually affect different social groups differently, sometimes to an extremely positive or negative degree. For example, redistributing major economic resources, radical changes in legal rights and penalties, and demonization of the newly exploited. In addition, many superstructures are resourced at the base's direct expense, for example, through taxation or tithes. This burden is likely to be stubbornly resisted or commercialized by returning the superstructure to the base with all the problems that entails. Or it may be deflected onto others, for example, by taxing workers more heavily, by paying them less, and by eliminating social provisions. All this means that there will be political struggles over
Spoken for a
superstructures.
minute or two before this armored water cannon truck was quote-unquote let loose on protesters, spraying those high-pressure water jet streams into the crowd. But the protesters now trying to repulse the armored truck with stones and anything else they can get their hands on.
These struggles may be between the ruling class, the economy's direct producers, the superstructure's own authorities, operators and users, other superstructures competing for economic resources, and the rest of society. So superstructures are also inherently problematic. As a result, the signs of success and failure are not always obvious or agreed. Each interested party will have its own aims and criteria, so each superstructure is a compromise and unstable, and its direction contentious. Fortunately, superstructures don't need to be perfect. They need to work, but they don't need to be totally effective, fully compatible, completely complete, or absolutely efficient, reliable, or durable. In this situation, at least, good enough really is good enough.